Hi guys, and welcome to the Is It Worth It for the IS-2, the Tier 7 Soviet Premium Heavy Tank. This tank is currently not available from the tech tree, or it's not available from the gift shop. It was originally available as part of the Berlin Quartet. It has been on sale at least once since then, at least here on the EU server, and I have absolutely no doubts it's going to be coming to the premium shop sooner rather than later, so you're going to get more chances to pick up this tank. And the question we're going to be asking today is this tank worth picking up? So let's start with the history of the tank, and the IS probably doesn't need much of an introduction. It's a very famous line of tanks with a lot of very famous variations, but just in case anyone out there is not aware, the IS in the name comes from the first two initials of Joseph Stalin. So the IS line of tanks was named after Joseph Stalin. It saw a lot of action towards the end of World War II after its first introduction in 1943, but the history begins slightly before then, because the main battle tank of the Soviet Union at the beginning of World War II was the KV-1, and while initially the KV-1 was performing quite well, it very quickly became outclassed by faster, more maneuverable tanks. Also, with the introduction of the T-34 Russian medium tank, the KV-1 was kind of left behind with regards to mobility. So very quickly the KV-1 was redesigned as a more lightly armoured heavy tank, and it was renamed to the KV-1S. Now again, initially the KV-1S became the main heavy battle tank for the Soviets, but again, it became outgunned and outclassed by a lot of the armour it was taking on, mainly Tigers. And towards the beginning of 1943, the Russians managed to capture their first Tiger, and they realised that the KV-1S really wasn't able to compete in the heavy tank category against the Tiger. So very quickly they went back to the drawing board and came up with the idea of a new line of Russian heavy tanks called the IS. But before the IS could roll off the production line, it needed to be designed, and they needed a stopgap. So they took the KV-1S and they upgunned it to the 85mm, the D5T 85mm, which was reckoned to be a gun good enough to take on German armour. So the KV-1S was very quickly remodeled as the KV-85, equipped with the 85mm, and about 140 of them were built in between the IS being conceived and the IS starting to roll off the production line. Now, originally, as I say, the 85mm was considered sufficient to deal with German armour. So the first ISs to roll off the production line in October 1943 were actually IS-85s. They were originally designed to have the 85mm that the KV-85 was using. However, the gun, although at the time it was designed and planned to be used on the Russian tanks, was considered adequate, it wasn't performing quite as well as it should have. So while the original ISs rolling off the production line in October 1943 did have the 85mm, they were called the IS-85. Those tanks were also tested with other guns. One of the other guns it was tested with was a naval gun, a 100mm D10, and that gun was very successful as an anti-tank gun. It was performing very well against German armour and during testing. So another bunch of ISs came off the production line with 100mm guns. So we had the IS-85, then we had a bunch of IS-100s that rolled off the production line. But a third gun they also tested on the IS was a 122mm, and the 122mm was actually outperformed by the 100mm as regards anti-tank performance, firing AP. However, it was a much better gun for firing HE. The shell carried more HE, and therefore it was better for destroying fortifications or taking out soft targets. And as most of you probably know, tanks were far more likely to fire HE during World War II than AP. So it was decided that maybe the 122mm was a better gun for the IS as opposed to the 85mm or the 100mm. So towards the end of that first run of IS tanks off the production line, the last ones were all fitted with 122 millimeters. So what we had at the end of the first production of the IS was the same tank with 3 different guns. We had the IS-85, which was armed with the 85 millimeter. We had the IS-100 armed with the 100 millimeter, and we had the IS-122 armed with the 122 millimeter. So 3 different guns on the same tank, but only 130 of those tanks were actually built because it was an experimental model. Yes, the IS, the Tier 7 Russian heavy tank in-game, the IS-1 was an experimental model. And where did it get its name, IS-1? Well, basically, any tank that came off that first line of production that had the 85mm or the 100mm became known as the IS-1. Any tank that came off that first line of production that had the 122mm became an IS-2, but not really an IS-2. And to be perfectly correct, the first line of tanks, or the first ISs that came off that production line with the 122mm became known as the IS-2 model 1943. So the model of the tank changed before production began on the IS-2. And this is the real IS-2. This is not the experimental model that we have in game. So this is the IS we have in game. You can call it the IS experimental, but or you can call it the IS-1. If it came with the 85mm D5T, it is an IS-85. If it came with the 100mm D10T, then it's an IS-100. But if it came with a 122mm D25T, it became known as the IS-2 model 1943. So it's an earlier model than the actual IS-2 that is available as a premium tank. The major difference, or the biggest difference, is the front of the hull. You'll notice that you've got a very, very angled upper front plate here leading onto a very flat area around the driver's port. That is inherited from the KV line of tanks. But we're talking about the IS-2 here. Now, this tank began production in January 1944 and stayed in production up till the end of World War II. The major differences between this tank, IS-2, and the IS-1 we have in game were that these tanks came with the 122mm gun as standard, and you'll also see that the front of the tank is very, very well sloped compared to the IS-1 or the IS experimental or the IS model 1943. It's got lots and lots of names, but mainly the main difference is this frontal armor, which was very, very well sloped. And as you can see here, with the weld here, this was a single piece of cast metal, which obviously meant it was easier to manufacture, easier to produce, and it meant that the production of the IS-2 proceeded a lot quicker. There weren't multiple parts. The entire front of the IS-2 was one singular piece of metal. Now, unlike the IS-1 or the IS experimental or the IS model 1943, this was a mass-produced tank. There were over 4,000 IS-2s built in 1944 compared to the 130 IS-1s that were built. So this was the main battle tank towards the end of World War II. So yeah, I'm very, very surprised it's not the other way around. Usually the prototype or the variant is the premium tank, but in this case it's not. The IS-2 was the main heavy battle tank, and it's a premium. So if you want to get the main Russian battle tank, as I said, you're going to have to buy a premium. And as the main Russian heavy battle tank towards the end of World War II, the IS-2 was involved in the retaking of German-occupied territories, was involved in the invasion of Germany towards the end of World War II, and there were a lot of images of Russian tanks rolling through the streets of Berlin, and many of them have these markings. Now, these markings are replicated because this is the Berlin edition of the IS-2, but what these markings were there for was to aid in easy recognition, so that Allied forces would easily be able to recognize Russian tanks, and not only ground forces, but more importantly, the air forces or the various air forces from the Allies will be able to recognize the Soviet tanks from the air. But that's basically the markings. No matter what camo you put on the tank, the markings are there because it is a Berlin edition. The tank remained in service right up till the 1960s, at which point it was placed into storage or decommissioned by Russia, and it was sold to many other countries and did see combat in other areas of the world. But most countries had phased out the IS-2 for other tanks by about the 1970s. So we're going to be comparing the IS-2 against all the other Tier 7 premium heavy tanks in the game. Unfortunately, there only happens to be one, which is the FV201A45, which is a British premium heavy tank. Ironically, actually, the FV201, which is going to be the next review on the channel, but the FV201 was actually designed in response to the IS-2 and the IS-3. So the only reason this tank exists is the fact that the IS-2 was built. But anyway, yeah, I didn't mean to go into that history. FV201 is going to be on the channel very soon, but starting with the comparison, the IS-2 gets not very many hit points compared to the FV201. It gets 1280 compared to 1500, so not great, but that's only on paper. When you compare the IS-2 against similar tier 7 tanks in-game, 1280 is actually okay. It's actually quite a heavy tank, comes in at about 47 tons for me. It's lighter than the FV201, and it gets less engine power, so even though it's slightly lighter, it gets a worse engine. It gets better top speed than the FV201 does. It gets much better traverse speed. In fact, 38 degrees per second is very good for a heavy tank, and it outclasses the FV201 easily. The turret traverse is not quite as good. That's one thing the FV201 is good at, but 28 degrees per second is that's probably slightly below average for a tier 7 heavy tank, but it's okay, it's workable. Definitely not as quick as the FV201. The view range is only 350 meters, which is below average. Tier 7 that can see tier 9s, really the view range is a negative, but most heavy tanks aren't known for their view range, and the signal range isn't very good either, 440, so occasionally you will lose contact with tanks on the other side of the map, but very occasionally, because those tanks will usually have better radios. So signal range, not as big a problem at higher tier as it is at lower tier, but it does have worse signal range than the FV201. When it comes to armor, you can see that the armor looks okay. In fact, the armor looks much better than the FV201. The only place where the armor is lacking is perhaps the front of the turret. It only gets 100 millimeters of frontal turret armor compared to 152 on the FV201, but the hull armor is better in every single way, and the side of the turret and rear of the turret are roughly about the same. So yeah, it's going to be a slightly faster, slightly more maneuverable tank than the FV201, and the armor looks better in pretty much every way except the front of the turret. But these two tanks, other than the fact they're both tier 7, they're both premiums, and they're both heavy tanks, really don't have a lot in common. And you're probably wondering, how does the IS-2 model 1944 compare against maybe the Chinese IS-2 that Russia actually exported to China, or maybe the IS-1 model 1943? And for that, we're going to pop into Tanks GG. So we're going to be comparing the IS-2 Russian Premium Heavy versus the regular IS-1 in-game, or the model 1943, and the Chinese IS-2. And what you're going to see is that the difference between these three tanks is negligible. It's tiny. The differences are so small you're probably not even going to notice them. So this is a premium tank that's as equally competitive as the Chinese IS-2 or the regular IS in-game. When it starts off with firepower, starting with firepower, the gun, you can see that the gun is identical on all three tanks. Now, there are a couple of minor differences for the Chinese tank. It gets 20 meters per second faster shell velocity, but that's probably unnoticeable. And I believe the premium ammo on the Chinese IS-2 happens to be heat, as opposed to APCR on the ISs. But really, when it comes to firing AP, all three tanks are pretty much identical. The weapon handling, again, almost identical. Same aim time, same accuracy. The regular IS, or the IS-1 in-game, has actually got slightly better accuracy accuracy while firing on the move, but probably unnoticeable. The difference is so small. What is noticeable, however, is the Chinese IS-2 has actually got the worst gun elevation by 5 degrees and gun depression by 1 degree. So it only gets 5 degrees of gun depression compared to 6 degrees on both Russian tanks. So yeah, the elevation and depression on the Chinese tank. It's one of the reasons I actually didn't like. I love the IS-2, I love the regular IS in game, and I didn't like the Chinese IS-2. The lack of gun depression is probably one of the main reasons. When it comes to movement, you could see similarities again across all three tanks. Even though the IS-2 Russian tank is a premium tank, it is incredibly competitive with the regular in-game tanks. It gets the same acceleration and top speed as the IS. It gets the same reverse speed as the IS. Only the Chinese tank has slightly faster top speed, but it also gets the worst engine and the worst horsepower to weight ratio. The regular IS in game gets the best engine by 100 horsepower. It also gets the best horsepower to weight ratio, but the terrain resistance on the regular IS isn't as good as it is on the IS-2. So all in all, even though it's got a better engine and better horsepower to weight ratio, the worse terrain resistance means that all three of these tanks actually perform very, very similarly. In fact, the IS-2 is probably a little bit faster than even the IS-2 for the Chinese. But yeah, the engine difference, really, there isn't much of a difference at all. The traverse speed on the regular IS in game is probably a little bit of a negative, but it's 3 degrees worse per second than either of the IS-2s. But again, the difference is so small, most players probably aren't going to notice it. When it comes to armor and health, you can see that the IS-2 premium tank falls right in the middle. It's got slightly better frontal armor than the Chinese IS-2 for some reason, I don't quite know why, and it's got worse frontal armor than the regular IS in game, but as per usual, that doesn't tell you the whole story. Because the IS-1 or the model 1943, it may have more frontal armor on paper. It's got 120 millimeters, but you can see that that armor is very, very sloped, or it's very, very flat, because it's based on the KV series of tanks. And what that means is it's got 120 millimeters. That flatness means it's actually only about 129 millimeters of effective armor. Now, when we compare that to the IS-2 premium tank, and we're going to go 3D model, and we're going to go for the visual. What you can see is it's sloped, so even though it's got 20 millimeters less armor, it's sloped. And while we got 126 millimeters, 127 millimeters effective frontal armor on the IS-1 model 1943, what we've got is about 165, 160 millimeters on the front of the IS-2 model 1944. So the frontal armor on paper is worse, but in game it's far, far more effective. So yeah, this sloping, one of the major differences between the 1943 model and the 1944. The turret armor is identical across all three tanks, and about the only other major difference, although I haven't noticed much of a difference, is the engine health. The IS-2 premium tank gets much less engine health than either the regular IS in-game or the Chinese IS-2, so technically I suppose getting shot in the engine is far more likely to knock your engine out when you're driving the IS-2 premium Russian tank than it is when you're driving either of the others. But again, not something I've noticed. The view range is identical across all three tanks, and about the only place where there's any major difference is the radio range, which is very, very poor on the IS-2, but at least in higher tier games, other tanks have better radios, better signal range, so it's not quite as bad as one of the premium tanks I reviewed recently, but the other two tanks have it beaten. The chance of fire going on fire is 3% higher on the IS-2 in premium IS-2 than it is on the two tanks in game, but again, that's not really going to be that noticeable. But essentially what you can see is that the IS-2 premium Russian heavy tank is as competitive as the regular IS is in game. The differences are tiny, and it's as competitive as the Chinese IS-2 is in game. The differences are maybe slightly bigger with regards its gun depression and its horsepower to weight ratio, but it's very, very competitive to either of these tanks, and it's a premium. And while we're in Tanks GG, we might as well have a better look at the armor. And as I mentioned, thanks to this sloping, the frontal armor on this tank is better than it is on the Chinese tank, which is 10mm less, and it's much, much better than the regular IS in game because of this sloping. So frontal armor is actually quite good. It's going to cause lower tier tanks some problems. Of course, you've got your traditional weak lower glacis, as most Russian tanks do, but the lower glacis is where you want to be shooting an IS, whether it's an IS-1 or an IS-2, and it's also got the traditional weak cupola, very, very large cupola that a lot of guns are going to be able to penetrate with absolutely no problems. The gun mantlet is okay. It's okay in places, but still not amazing. A lot of people don't tend to shoot the turrets on ISs, but if you're in a tank with a decent penetrating gun, the turret armor can be surprisingly weak on any IS model, but you can see that the effective armor on the gun mantlet, it's only about 100mm. It's got no armor behind it, so you can pen the turret armor in places on the IS-2. There are more effective areas. You can see some sloping or some rounded areas on the gun mantlet that can cause troll bounces, but in the main, you're only going to have to go through 100mm of armor. It is spaced, but there's nothing behind it. The gun mantlet also extends over to the left of the turret, so if you shoot further out the cheeks, the armor is going to be more effective. But if you shoot on the side, on the right hand side of the turret, armor much less effective. You can see it's only about 100mm in places. Obviously, the further out you get, the bigger the slope gets, but it's still easily penetrated, or easy to be able to penetrate it with most tanks that are going to be shooting it. So if you've got a tank that has decent penetration, just go for the turret. You're probably going to pen it, but failing that, go for the lower glacis, assuming he's not hull down. And even if you can't hit the lower glacis and you're having problems with the turret, just shoot the commander's cupola. It's only going to be about 90mm compared to 100mm on the front of the turret. So yeah, it's quite surprising how many people try to shoot you here, which is actually the most effective armor on the tank as opposed to your turret, which most guns can easily penetrate. Just like the IS variants in-game, the IS-2 is 90mm of side armor, and that means you can side scrape quite effectively in this tank. You can see that the effective armor is increased by quite a lot. The tracks do count as 20mm of spaced armor, but just be aware there is some sloping going on, so you do have slight cheeks when you're side scraping, and if you've got players who know what they're doing, they're going to be able to penetrate you here without too much difficulty. So you are going to flatten up some areas of the tank when you do side scrape, but most people are probably going to be trying to shoot the side of your turret, side of your tank. So side scraping can be quite effective. The side of the tank itself is only about 90 to 100mm on the side of the turret, so a lot of guns are going to be able to penetrate it. Side of the hull is 90 to 100mm depending on whether you shoot at the front or the back. Again, might cause problems for lower tanks, but our lower tier tanks, but most similar tier, higher tier tanks are going to have no problems going through. The base of the hull only 90mm thick. The rear of the tank is quite weak at 70mm thick. So again, some guns firing HE may be able to penetrate it. It's only 60mm of effective armor, but again, there's some sloping. Lower tier tanks may have problems. And the roof of the armor, traditionally weak. It's only got 13mm of roof armor, so that means that RT can hit and RT can penetrate. But overall, for a tier 7, I think the armor is quite good. When you're top tier, the armor is very, very good. Obviously, when you're not top tier, this tank doesn't get special matchmaking. It will see tier 8s, it will see tier 9s. But yeah, if this tank got special matchmaking, it would be so overpowered. It's as good as the IS in-game, if not better in some ways. It's as good as the Chinese IS-2 in-game, if not better in some ways. So yeah, this tank is perfectly competitive as a tier 7 in a tier 8 or a tier 9 game. So let's talk about this gun, which is the 122mm D25T. Now, if you've played Russian tanks, you've probably played Russian tanks with 122mm, or you've probably played Chinese tanks that use 122mm. You should be 100% familiar with this gun by now. The stats are pretty much the same on this tank as they are on any other tank. What's impressive is the fact that this is a premium tank and the gun handles almost exactly the same on this tank as it does on the regular IS in-game, or the IS-2 for the Chinese. It's got a slow rate of fire, but it's got very, very good alpha damage, 390. You can get some incredibly high rolls with this gun. The accuracy, or the penetration, is 175 millimeters, which again is fine. It's more than enough if you're top tier. If you're in a tier 8 game, you should still be able to do a job without having to resort to premium ammo. And if you're in a tier 9 game, as long as you can get side and rear shots, 175 millimeters should be fine. But if you do have to engage tanks frontally, you've got APCR as your premium ammo, and that has 217 millimeters of penetration. Again, not that it's not that great. You will struggle against maybe some tier 9s with premium ammo, but if you can hit their weak spots, and if is the key word here, if you can hit their weak spots, 217 should be fine. What's worth noting regarding the premium ammo is the premium ammo is very, very expensive at 4,800 credits a shot. So while you will be able to make your money back if you hit and pen with a premium shot, if you're firing a lot of premium and bouncing premium shots, it's going to cut into the profit margins of the tank, as I say, because the premium ammo is very, very expensive. You shouldn't overlook the HE ammo against softer skin targets, because 61 millimeters of penetration is quite good for 122 millimeter, and you get 530 alpha damage. So up against Borsigs, Waffentraggers, or light tanks, you can do a lot of damage if you've got HE. The accuracy is 0.46, which is absolutely awful. Again, it's Russian accuracy, so sometimes the accuracy can be godlike, but sometimes it can be awful. It's accuracy that's going to leave you tearing your hair out now and again. Ooh. Hello, Jagdpanther 2. Huh? Okay. Hello, Jagdpanther 2. Huh? Oh, okay. And in addition to unreliable accuracy, we've also got 3.4 seconds of aim time, which is absolutely awful. But again, if you're familiar with Russian 122s, you should be familiar with the aim time and the accuracy by now. So let's check out this gun and this tank's mobility in action. We are here on Serene Coast. I'm platooned with Bringy and Tonza. And we are not top tier. It's a tier 8 game. There are 6 tier 8s. Or is it 7? 6 or 7 tier 8s on the enemy team. So we're pretty much mid-tier, but it's an IS. It's an IS-2, so it's quite comfortable. You could see that the acceleration is fine. Tonza is driving his Chinese IS-2, and you can see that I'm accelerating quicker than he is. So we're going to be bullies. At the beginning of this game, I said to Tonza, let's push middle. We'll meet their medium tanks, we'll meet their light tanks, and a shot on the move. So yeah, it's Russian accuracy. Sometimes you can miss fully aimed shots at 100 meters, and sometimes you're going to bounce or miss. But we bounced our first shot from the T-44, and we have enough alpha damage to kill him. T-59, or 5916, bouncing on the side of my armor. Again, this tank's armor is going to be effective against lower tier tanks, and you can see how quick and how fast and how maneuverable this tank is. It's almost like playing kind of a slower medium tank than it is playing a heavy tank. And when you're not top tier, you have so much freedom to actually move around the battlefield and play more like a medium tank. Now, don't have much to shoot at here, and I go for a snapshot and mistime it, but yeah, if you don't fully aim this gun, sometimes it's just not going to hit anything, but as I say, other times you are. So moving up, and you can see 6 degrees of gun depression compared to the Chinese IS-2. We're moving up. I don't have much to shoot at here, and I'm wondering maybe I can get a high RNG roll, but nope. So I knew that shot wasn't going to go in, but we hit exactly where we were aiming. So we fully aimed, hit exactly where we were aiming. And yeah, this gun, sometimes even when you do that, it won't miss, or it won't hit, and sometimes when you do it, it hits dead center. But IS-3 has come down here. Now this is tier 7 versus tier 8. So you're going to see the 175 millimeters of penetration. I figured my best job, or my best chance, is to actually track this guy. I was at an angle and the IS-3 bounces. So the frontal armor, he shot my hull. He would have penned my turret if he'd shot my turret, but you can see I'm not using premium ammo. I'm just trying to get to this guy's side to try and track him. And I decide, you know what, he's angled backwards. So he flattened out his armor and I could finally pen the IS-3 for the front. Now here we're going to see some long range shooting. So I notice the leva on the hill up here, wait for my gun to reload. Reload is quite slow, but shot goes exactly where I want it. Track the leva and do damage to him at the same time. This is a tier 8 I'm shooting, and 175mm is just fine when you know what you're doing and shooting the side. That was a track shot, but I missed it and hit his hull, but we still did 387 damage, just slightly below average roll there. And finally, we finish him off with a shot. Again, going for the track. The shot goes slightly to the left and goes through his lower glacis. But yeah, this gun, it can handle tier 8s if you know what you're doing. It can shoot weak spots. But you can see again the speed, mobility. We're trying to move down, trying to get a shot on the IS-152. Unfortunately, I didn't aim and the shot goes slightly to the right and hits his gun mantlet. So yeah, you can take snapshots of this tank. It's just very rare that they actually go in. So again, don't have a chance to kill him, but we're up to 2,221 damage so far, and this is was a tier 8 game. We were tier 7's tier 8 game, and you can see going uphill, this is probably the only place where maybe the IS-2 isn't as good as the regular IS, because that horsepower to weight ratio makes a huge difference when going up slopes. We're only doing 10 kilometers an hour to get up that slope, but we are moving around. You can see Tanza moving around to take on the Ferdi. I'm just looking for targets here. But so far, I have bounced a T-44 shot, I've bounced an IS-3 shot, and I've bounced two 59-16 shots. Nice final ammo rack kill on the Ferdi, which Tanza wasn't happy about. He had done all that work to try and get around by behind the Ferdi, and I ended up nicking the kill. But yeah, that was a very, very simple game. 4 kills, 2,400 damage in an IS-2 in a tier 8 game. So that was just a very, very quick replay highlighting just how fast and how maneuverable this tank is. The traverse speed is surprisingly good for a heavy tank. The acceleration and top speed, again, pretty good for a heavy tank. Now this is a light heavy tank compared to the heavy tanks like maybe the KV-3 at tier 7 is, but it is fast enough, it is maneuverable enough to play it aggressively, play it almost like a medium. Your gun has big alpha, it can be very inaccurate or it can be very accurate. In that game, most of it was accurate except when I took a couple of snapshots, and you also got to see the penetration. 175mm of penetration, fine against tier 8s as long as they're giving you their weak sides or their weak spots. Not so good against tier 8s when they are played to their strengths. So I couldn't deal with an IS-3 frontally, had to make do with tracking him until he gave me a bad angle and we were able to take him out. Then with standard AP, didn't fire any premium in that game. And you also got to see how good that sloped hull armor is. Now, a lot of the tanks that bounced on me probably would have penned if they'd gone for my turret, but instead they were going for my hull, which was sloped, which is angled, which is better than the the regular IS in game, and which is actually more effective than the Chinese IS-2's frontal hull. So we bounced an IS-3, we bounced a T-44, and we bounced a couple of shots from the 59-16. It was a very, very quick game as well, so we picked up 1141 XP, 2,395 damage done and 4 kills. Now, again, this is just highlighting the tank, it's not highlighting my own skills, but what you can see is we managed to do 2,395 damage. We did that with 11 shots, of which only 7 pens. So 2,395 with 7 shots that actually did damage, and the game was over in 4.5 minutes. That's how long that game was. So you can imagine how much damage and how effective this tank can be in a longer game. You can also see it's a decent credit maker. So I didn't fire any premium ammo, and as a result, I made some decent credits in a game that maybe wasn't high damage wise, but it was decent XP, decent credits for a tier 7 premium tank. So let's talk about crew, and the IS-2 has 4 crew members. It's got a commander, a gunner, a driver, and a loader. Now that's going to fit most of the IS line of tanks that were developed after the IS-2, but we're going to bring up the crew details here. We're going to pop into the tech tree. Now unfortunately the IS-2 is not a great crew trainer, not because of the tank's fault. It's a very good crew trainer if you're focused on the IS line of tanks. Now that really starts with the KV-85, which led on to the IS-85, but it's got the same crew layout as the KV-85. The IS began life as the IS-85, became the IS-100, and then the IS-122, before becoming the IS model 1943, which led on to the IS-2, but same crew layout as that. IS-3, same crew layout. So it's going to suit a lot of the tanks. It's got the same crew layout as the T-10, which was actually the IS-10. I might go into that in another video, but yeah, we've got a crew layout for the IS-10, or the T-10, which is identical. And then in real life, the IS-4 was the successor to the IS-3, obviously IS-3, IS-4, and that's got a similar crew layout of 4 crew members. But things get very complicated with Russian tanks, because the IS-7, which is at the end of the IS line and shouldn't be, this IS-4 should be here, IS-7 should be one down, because the IS-7 is a prototype. It never existed beyond prototype, but the IS-7 has an extra loader which can't be trained up in the IS-2. And then we've got the heavy lines of Russian tanks, and you know, you're going to need extra crew members at the lower tiers. KV-1 is an extra crew member. KV-1S, which was derived from the KV-1, has an extra crew member. T-150 has an extra radio operator, but it also just an extra radio operator. But then we come to the KV-3. We've got an extra radio operator and an extra loader. KV-4 is identical. We need an extra radio operator. We need an extra loader. ST-1, we need an extra loader. We don't need the radio operator anymore. And then, as I say, the IS-4 is a perfect match. So, yeah, when it comes to crew training, it's fine for a lot of the IS line of tanks, but it's not going to be a good crew trainer for the second line or the imaginary line of Russian tanks. These all need either radio operators or extra loaders or both. So it's not the tank's fault, it's just the fact there are so many Russian tanks in the tech tree. As a crew layout, or as a crew trainer, I think it's okay if you're going down one of the Russian lines. I think it's not great if you're going down another Russian line. I think maybe a tank like the Churchill 3 is one of the few good crew trainers for both Russian lines, or maybe the KV-5. Moving on to equipment. Now, there are quite a few equipment choices, but starting off with vents, I have gone for vents on the tank. That's probably a controversial choice. I like playing my heavy tanks as brawlers. I like being on the front line. I like shooting enemy tanks in the face, where view range is not as important. I know a lot of people would probably put some other piece of equipment on other than vents, but vents helps my aim time, which is poor. Vents helps my accuracy, which is poor. So yeah, I went for vents because I tend to play my heavy tanks like heavy tanks. I think if you're sitting back and sniping in a heavy tank, there are exceptions depending on the tank, but I think in most cases, if you're sitting back and sniping in a heavy tank, you're doing it wrong. So I think the IS-2 is a brawler. I went for improved vents over optics simply because I brawl in this tank, but wet ammo rack is a waste of time on this tank. I don't remember getting ammo racked very much. Now, I did get ammo racked once or twice, but not as many times as, for example, a tank I'm going to be reviewing very soon on the channel. So I think there are better pieces of equipment other than the ammo rack. Toolbox is only viable if you don't have a repair crew. Forgot to mention when I was talking about crew, this tank comes with a 100% crew that have brothers in arms because it's a Berlin edition tank. So yeah, I think toolbox is only viable as long as you don't have a repair crew. But once you do have a repair crew, or a crew that are pretty well trained in repairs, take the toolbox on or off. They're a better piece of equipment. Large caliber gun rammer is one of those pieces of equipment. It is an absolute must on pretty much every single tank you own. Improve your loading time, or decrease your loading time by 10% means increasing your DPM by 10%. It's a no-brainer. Gun rammer goes on pretty much every single tank you own. Heavy small liner, complete waste of time in this tank. It's not a heavy and it's not slow, so you're going to be playing this tank more like a medium more often than not. Filling the tanks with CO2 is not a bad idea. Again, this tank gets its engine knocked out, goes on fire a little bit more frequently than maybe the IS or the IS-2 for the Chinese, but on the other hand, it wasn't a big enough a problem for me to warrant putting the equipment on. I think there are better pieces of equipment. Enhanced torsion bars to improve the suspension is an absolute complete waste of time. We've got a enhanced gun laying drive to improve the aim time. Now, this tank does not come with vert stabs, unfortunately, so the aim time is terrible on this tank. I went for the gun laying drive over another piece of equipment, but choice is up to you. I think the aim time is definitely something that is weak on this tank, so it needs to be improved. Cyclone filter to improve your engine durability. Again, as I say, the engine is supposedly, according to the statistics, quite weak on this tank. Personally, I didn't notice any major differences, but again, if you do and you're having problems, cyclone filter would not be a bad idea, but I think there are better pieces of equipment. Coated optics is viable on this tank, maybe over the vents. If I had any piece of equipment I was going to remove from the tank and replace, it would probably be the vents, and I would probably replace it with coated optics, because this tank is a brawler. You're going to be playing it on the move. You're going to be constantly on the move. I think coated optics are going to give you better performance on this tank than maybe binocs would. Binocs means you're sitting still and you're sniping. This is not a sniper. The gun isn't accurate enough and the penetration isn't good enough over distance, so I don't think binocs are viable on the tank. Coated optics, much better choice, assuming you don't go for vents like I did. And a camo net. It's a heavy tank. It's got a very poor camo rating in the first place, so camo net is going to do very, very little difference to the tank. If you're playing on a budget, I suppose toolbox, camo net and binocs really aren't going to hurt the tank very much, but there are definitely much better pieces of equipment. Okay folks, time for the overview game, a game where I show you as many strengths and weaknesses of whatever tank I'm reviewing in one replay, and this tank really doesn't have very many weaknesses, but we are here on Swamp, on a game I played just a couple of days ago for this review, and we're not top tier. I'm playing solo this time. We're not top tier. It's another tier 8 game. There are 6 tier 8s on the enemy team. There's RT involved as well. So we're just advancing down along the K line, and we're going to try and get up to the castle. You can see that the speed is pretty on par with a lot of the other heavy tanks here. I'm not the fastest, but I'm keeping up with them. And we're actually catching them in some cases. We're doing our full 34 kilometers an hour long here, so this tank easily reaches 34 kilometers an hour. Good ground resistance, and even though the power to weight ratio isn't as good as it is on the in-game IS, it's still pretty good thanks to that ground resistance. So we've moved up, slowed slightly going up the slope. We're doing 25 kilometers an hour. And I'm expecting to meet heavy tanks, so there's the first heavy tank, a Tiger 1. And I decide, you know what, let's see if we can get some side and rear shots. So even though there's RT in play, what I usually do is I usually push up to the buildings in front of me. I always risk taking a hit here. Got spotted. Not good. And yes, the IS-3 is looking at me. So is the WZ-111. But I decide, yeah, I'm probably going to have to go for it. Oh, looks as if none of them are looking this way. So, oh, and there's that flaming RNG. That was an easy pen on the Tiger 1 on flat armor, so I risk taking a hit to get across, and I do, but Tiger's just fired. And this time we can pull out. He's close enough to take a snapshot. Shot doesn't go exactly where I aimed, but still hits the Tiger at this range. So now it's just a matter of waiting, using third person, wait for the Tiger to shoot, and we'll pop out and see if we can get another shot into him. Oh, he's focused on me. Okay. Oh, IS-3's moving up. Tiger fires. And we finish him off that time. So that's pretty much where I hit the Tiger the first time and bounced, but we managed to pen that time. So first kill of the game, 700 damage from 2 shots. So we're moving up. And again, against tier 8, sometimes the penetration is not going to be enough, so I take a snapshot, notice the 111 is looking at me, but he's fired. My reload should be slightly faster than his, I reckon. I'm going below his tracks. Nope. Ah, bugger. That was just old man reaction shot. I twitched back as I fired and hit the wall, so you get to see my games, warts and all, but he's fired again. And again, put a tracking shot in, trying to get some assistance damage. Unfortunately, doesn't do any damage. And against tier 8s frontally, sometimes the penetration is going to be lacking. There we go, side of the turret on a 111. Should have enough penetration to go through, but unfortunately, I bounce again. And that time we do it. So aim for his ammo rack, get a cheeky little ammo rack as a bonus. And there's kill number 2. So kept the 111 tracked, only managed to do 70 or 19 damage to him, but nicked the kill. So in the meantime, tanks below me, CDC, and we're flanking. And I mean, this is a heavy tank, and we're flanking. This IS-3 pushes me out of the way. We get a shot in the move. As I say, the IS in-game is supposedly better at shooting on the move, but this one, I seem to do it quite frequently. It's a Russian gun, so ELC falls forward, and that's that high alpha, able to one-hit kill that ELC. He may have taken some damage before then, but Type 58, CDC down here. And again, we're flanking, we're playing like a medium tank, and that's what the IS in-game, that's what the IS-2 for the Chinese, and that's what this tank are very, very good at doing. They're very, very flexible. So we've wrapped up down on this corner of the map. Unfortunately, the enemy team have won the other flank, so we're just moving forward. And we're going to try and use our gun depression here, but unfortunately, because we've only got 6 degrees of gun depression, I'm going to have to use the terrain here to try and force my gun down on target. And as you can see, problems with gun depression, we fall down, and there's an enemy IS-2. Look at that accuracy. Wasn't fully aimed, was able to snipe his cupola. This is Russian accuracy. So again, problems with gun depression, not much to aim at, trying to use the terrain to get an angle. And there we go, another shot straight into his cupola. Look at the accuracy. I mean, sometimes, some games, this gun won't hit the bloody thing, and then other times you can snipe cupolas from 300, 400 meters. So we're up to 2,200 damage, 3 kills. I've got 6 rounds of premium ammo, or regular ammo left. I forgot to mention this tank doesn't carry that much ammunition. It carries as much ammunition as the other ISs, but in a big game where you're doing a lot of shooting, sometimes you'll find yourself running low on ammo. So again, just auto-aiming, going to push this ridge here. No other enemy tanks have been spotted other than this Chiri, so I decide to flank. This Su-122-44 is in trouble. Comet has got above me, but we're going on the attack, and again, slightly below average roll. I've taken a hit from RT that has tracked me. The Comet's put a few shots in, and I get into cover, so lost a lot of health there. The Comet was able to penetrate my side without too much trouble. Managed to get 4 shots into me. The Chiri bounced, and RT tracked me in place. So the armor really hasn't held up in this game. Not as much as it did in the first game. Now, this is where I make a big mistake here, unfortunately. I think I have shots on the Comet from this position. I'm waiting for the KV-85 to spot him. And I don't realize that the ridge is just too high. I can't see through the trees here. Don't realize that the hill in front of me. Now I do. Oh, okay. Well, even if the Comet had been spotted, I wouldn't have been able to get a shot on him. The ridge was too high. So we're going to push forward. 2 RT, 3 enemy tanks left. I'm on 3 kills, 3k damage. So just 2 tier 8 RTs, Jagdpanzer 4 in the distance, and again, don't have much to shoot at. And don't aim fully, still able to get a shot in. Now I'm very aware that RT is still in play. He goes for my cupola, and we're aimed fully as someone else takes him out. So reload, it's not a fast firing gun. Comet is up here still. Very surprised this guy's still in exactly the same position. But again, problems with gun depression, trying to get an angle on this guy, and he starts taking fire from a T-34. So just can't get my gun down. 6 degrees of gun depression. sometimes still isn't enough. But KV-85 is flanking the Comet. I'm moving up. I'm auto-aimed. And there we go. There we go. Told you the accuracy on this gun was a pain in the ass. Sometimes it's amazing, sometimes it's not. So I'm still reloading. Comet bounces. Get one shot into the Comet. And I'm on, as I say, I'm aware RT is still involved. So I've been in that position too long. Move into more of an RT safe position. The M443, M40, M43 would have had shots on me, but there's an OI camping their spawn, so it's really just the Comet left here. I didn't really want to risk losing any more health. I probably, in hindsight, could have killed the Comet, risk taking another hit and going down to about 100 health, but wasn't worth it in my opinion. So we're up to 3,700, 3,800 damage. As a tier 7, tier 8 game. OI in the distance, just enemy RT in the OI. RT is going to be a safer bet for me, so we're fully aimed and take him out. And there's 400 damage done. This high alpha allows you to pick up so many kills. And I don't manage to get the OI, so we finish up doing 4.2k damage. So it may not be the quickest of tanks, but it's definitely not slow. It gets a 34 km/h top speed, and it reaches that speed. It's got good acceleration, it's got good ground resistance, and it's got good traverse for a heavy tank. It's a very, very flexible, maneuverable tank that allows you to move around the battlefield and to react to what's happening. That was an ace game. It was also high caliber as a tier 7 in a tier 8 game. We finished with 1529 XP, 4,198 damage. As I say, not top tier. Picked up 4 kills. And the gun, I mean, the gun is derpy. It's derpy as heck. Sometimes you're going to miss shots that you couldn't possibly miss, and sometimes you're going to hit shots that are impossible. I mean, we got 2 beautiful shots into the cupola of a rival IS-2 while I wasn't even fully aimed and was struggling with gun depression. But the gun does have problems. Like I say, gun depression, 6 degrees is not bad, but it's still going to cause problems. The aim time is incredibly slow, and the accuracy either works or it doesn't. It's Russian, but it is capable of having big damage games with big alpha damage. So of the 18 shots, we actually hit 16, which is pretty good for the gun, but we only managed to pen 12. We were struggling to go through the WZ-111. This tank will struggle, the gun will struggle to go through tier 8 heavies if they're at angles, or higher tier heavies if they're angled or if they're hull down, but you can't argue with the damage. And we received 10 hits, 4 of which bounced. Unfortunately, Comet had very easy shots down at me from above, managed to pen me quite a few times, but other than that, the armor was okay. We spotted 1, damaged 9, destroyed 4, did 853 assistance damage, and again, it's a premium tank. Now, the ammo is not the cheapest. So we fired 18 shots, it cost us 18,500 credits. So ammo is not cheap. Even the regular AP ammo is exactly the same on this tank as it is on the IS in game, so it's not cheap, but it's a premium tank, so you're going to earn credits. 86,000 credits for a tier 7. That's pretty good. Could be better, and also could be a lot worse. If you are firing premium ammo, don't expect to earn quite as much money. But yeah, this tank, it's just, there are so few weaknesses. It's a typical Russian heavy tank. It's very, very competitive for its tier, and I really, really can't think of very many bad things to say about it. Okay, folks, time to sum up. Should the IS-2 appear in the gift shop any time in the future, and I've got a sneaking suspicion it's going to be appearing very, very shortly, is it going to be worth picking up? Well, let's start with the negatives. Yeah, I'm having problems, guys. I really am having problems trying to come up with negatives for this tank. Seriously, this tank is it's as competitive as the IS in-game, the regular tier 7 Russian heavy tank, and it's better than the IS in-game in some ways. It's as competitive as the IS-2 for the Chinese, and it's better than the Chinese IS-2 in some ways. It's a very, very competitive Tier 7 premium, but it's so hard to come up with negatives, but I'll do my best, guys. I will do my best. It's not the best crew trainer. It's only got 4 crew members, which means it's a perfect layout for the IS line of tanks, but it's going to suffer. You're going to need extra radio operators. You're going to need extra loaders for lower tier Russian heavy tanks, mid-tier Russian heavy tanks, and the second line of heavy Russian tanks. So you're missing out on crew members. It might not be the best crew trainer. It's got terrible gun handling. It's Russian gun handling, so sometimes it's amazing and sometimes it's absolutely terrible. The aim time is absolutely dreadful at 3.4 second aim time, incredibly bad. The accuracy of 0.46, incredibly poor. But as I say, it's Russian. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The penetration on the gun, 175 millimeters, is going to be lacking. It's going to be fine against tier 7s. It's going to be fine against most tier 8s, but when it comes up against tier 9s, this 175 millimeters of penetration is going to struggle. You're going to have to fire premium ammo, and the premium ammo is not amazing on the tank. It's okay, it's not amazing, but it's very, very expensive. So if you do get into a lot of tier 9 games and you do find yourself firing a lot of premium ammunition, it is definitely going to cut into your profit margins unless you can hit and pen your targets. So yeah, the signal range, or the view range, is not amazing at 350 meters. It does the job, but it's not amazing. And the signal range is absolutely terrible. And even in a tier 8 game or tier 9 game, you might find yourself losing contact with tanks now and again, but it's not as big an issue on higher tier tanks as it is on lower tier tanks. But yeah, I'm struggling. I mean, none of these negatives are terrible negatives. They're no really bad negatives. You know what? The biggest negative this tank has is the fact it's boring. Yeah, you heard me. That's it. There's nothing original about this. It's a tank that's already in game. I mean, if you want to play a tank that looks identical to this, play the Chinese IS-2. It looks identical to this. If you want to play, you know, with the exception of a few high definition details, but if you want to play a tank that plays exactly like this and trains up Russian heavy crews, you can play the IS, the regular IS in game. I think this tank is better than both of those tanks, but you know, they're so similar, there's so little difference between these tanks that really you're not missing out by not owning an IS-2. You can get exactly the same playing experience by playing the regular IS or the Chinese IS-2. And those are very strong tier 7 heavy tanks. So you know, it's ridiculous to say a weakness of this tank is it's unoriginal and boring. It's just a copy and paste of what's good about the Chinese IS-2 and what's good about the Russian IS-2. They put them all together and that's it. You've got the regular Russian IS-2, which in my opinion should be in the game anyway, because this tank was the production model. This had 4,000 units built. The IS in game was an experimental model and there were only 130 of those built, so this is the tank that should be in game. The regular IS should be the premium, but yeah, I mean, there's nothing special about this tank. When you buy an IS-2, you're going to know exactly what you're buying. You know how to play it already, or should know how to play it already. The negatives for this tank are so small, but you know, it's just got so many positives. I mean, the hit points are good. The hit points are very competitive, even though it's a premium tank. It gets more hit points than the regular IS in-game. It may not be the best crew trainer, but it comes with a 100% crew who happen to have brothers in arms. Very few premium tanks do, and my problem in World of Tanks isn't credits, or it isn't XP, or it isn't garage slots. It's the fact I own so many tanks and I'm always short of crews, and the fact that this comes with a fully trained crew with their first skill already, a huge selling point for me. It's worth, I would pay an extra €1 or €2 if every single premium tank I bought happened to have a 100% crew with brothers in arms. It is such a time saver. So this is a huge positive for the tank. It's a bully. It's It's an amazing tank when it gets top tier. It can still do a job at a tier 8 game. The only time this tank may feel a little bit underpowered is when you're up against a lot of tier 9s, but even then I still think the tank can be quite good. It can be played as a medium tank. It's fast enough and it's agile enough, 34 kilometers an hour top speed, 38 degrees per second traverse speed. It's not a good, to play it as a medium tank, it isn't good, but it can do it if it needs to, and when it's not top tier, you can play it more like a medium tank. It's got amazing alpha damage of 390. You can get some amazing top roll or high rolls. The armor is so much better on this tank than it is on the regular in-game counterparts because it's sloped and because it actually gets more armor frontally than the Chinese IS-2, which is exactly the same design. The frontal hull armor is actually better on this than it is on the Chinese IS-2 because this is a later model IS-2. It's got better frontal armor than the regular IS in-game. Even though on paper the regular IS gets more armor, it's flat compared to this sloping, so the effective armor on this tank is better than either of its two IS counterparts in-game. It's just such a competitive tank. It is a very, very easy tank to play. It doesn't get special matchmaking. I suppose technically that's a weakness, but it doesn't need special matchmaking. And the fact it comes with an amazing crew to begin with, this tank it's a very, very strong tank, guys, and I have to recommend it. It's worth it. I mean, if you like playing Russian ISs, if you like playing the Chinese IS-2, then you're going to like playing this tank, and that's probably the best advice I can give you. If you're on the fence and not sure about whether or not you want to buy this, maybe you have crew trainers already for the Russian heavies. If you're not sure, hop into one of those two tanks I mentioned, the IS-2 for the Chinese or the IS for the Russians. If you play them and you enjoy them and you're doing well in them, then you're going to absolutely love the IS-2. Might worth be taking out your credit cards and buying another premium tank. This one is extremely strong, it's extremely fun to play, it's very, very solid. You'll earn credits, you'll trade crew members, and I can't recommend it enough, guys. It's worth it. Yes, it is worth it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.